All right, this is the part where I ask everybody if they can see my screen. Yes, no. All right. So again, this is where I'm also going to remind you that it is lonely to do these presentations without lots of chit chat. So I'm inviting folks to be as communicative and as possible in this presentation. Hi. Welcome to Fundraising Friday. I am Polly Stamatopoulos, the Senior Director of Movement Group Engagement here at Progressive Multiplier. And today we're talking about reporting for your ED, your board, and you. This was one of the sessions that was specifically requested by this group. And hopefully I covered all the bases in this. We are not doing this as a two-part session because of the various holidays we had last week and coming up and end of year and all of that. So we're just going to do, I'm doing a brief presentation today with lots of space and air for us to chat in it. So I hope folks are into talking about reports because that's what we're doing today. Ready? All right. So as usual, Progressive Multiplier team is here to assist you in any way we can. We are a small but mighty crew. It's just the 5 of us, but we try our best to do a good job for our peeps. You'll see them come in and out occasionally during Fundraising Friday sessions. Sometimes they'll present, sometimes they'll just be a fly on the wall and be part of the learning community too. For those not well acquainted, we leverage funding to give to the progressive movement to help build revenue, specifically independent revenue. We know that progressive movements need to do fundraising differently to expand their bases and to do what they need to do. And we're all about trying to find ways to leverage resources to help you all do that. That's the sort of the quick and dirty Polly way of explaining what we do. But we're a funding intermediary, which means that we have to raise money to give it away. And we do our grant making based on fundraising experiments, and we invest in your fundraising activities. So if you ever have a project that you think that you want to do, a fundraising experiment that you would like to try, you should, and your work is in the area of achieving justice, realizing democracy, or restoring the environment, you should definitely mosey on over to our website and check and fill out our LOI. It's fairly light-lipped, and maybe someday we can work together in a bigger capacity rather than just on Fundraising Fridays, not just because Fundraising Fridays is awesome. If I do say so myself. Our Fundraising Fridays is brought to you all by a strategic assistance partnership that we have with the Resilience Initiative and the Leaders Trust. And through that partnership, we are able to provide not only these sessions that we do throughout the year, but also one-on-one coaching. We still have, I believe we still have some slots available. So if you want a 1-hour session, a block of 5-hour sessions, don't contact me directly, contact Michelle Mangle. She is the gatekeeper of this program, and she will let you know if there's eligibility. Her email is there. She's also on the invite that brought you here today, so you can always just copy it right off of the calendar invite. And there are some folks on the call already who have used that one-on-one coaching, and I'm sure if anyone had any questions about what that's like, you could probably chat about it in the chat or offline even. So what we have in store for the remainder of the year are 2 more sessions. We're going to do an annual planning guide to help you think about what you need to do for next year and sort of get your head right for the calendar year. It might not be your fiscal year, but most fundraising sort of follows the calendar year anyway. And then my crystal ball predictions and sort of running through some of the trends that we've seen or things that we learned about in 2022 that can inform 2023. I've also included the YouTube link on this slide. So when we share the PDF, you can actually click right off of that. But all of these sessions are recorded and saved on our YouTube channel. It's a private channel. It's really only for the use of folks who are part of the Resilience Initiative. So we do ask you to keep it within the group. But please feel free, especially folks who are new, to check out some of the sessions that we've done in the past. We're still in the process of updating those channels, and some of the videos need to be edited down, and we're doing our best to be stepwise and methodical about cleaning up some of that stuff, but that's the content's all there and then very accessible. All right, we're going to start the presentation. So basically, the reporting is really about how do we communicate our information and to whom. So who needs what and why? What should we include in a report, and a little bit about the graphic component of reporting. But as before I launch in there, I'd love to hear what folks hope to get out of the session or things that I can touch on for you to help to make sure I get your questions answered. Who's got burning questions or concerns about reporting?
Well, I'll throw something into the mix.
Please.
I'm a very new ED, and so I've only just begun to report out to my board, and so far my reporting has been like, we got this much from this organization, we got this much from that organization, I'm trying to get this much from that organization. So just even having a structure for a report that is beyond that is my starting place. So I'm really curious how to build a structure that I can continually pop numbers of both what's prospecting, what is coming in, what's committed, maybe even some timeline, because grants are always different timelines, and that is challenging. So anyway, I'm looking for, like, is there a structure that I can use to operationalize and make stuff more visually pleasing and stimulating down the road for the board and for me to keep track.
Excellent. Yeah, well, I'll be breaking down some of the things that I think are important to include in reports based on who the report is for, and depending on it, when what we plan on doing is sharing some templates after the session that might be helpful. I wanted to, hear what folks had to say. The thing about reporting that can be hard from, like the training perspective is everyone comes at it from a different perspective. Like some folks are like, got lots and lots of data points to share, and they need to figure out a way to share it really succinctly, and other, and there's also style, and there's some folks who just don't have a lot of data points, but have a lot of narrative that they want to share. And I think part of it is like just, figuring out what you need, what you want to communicate, but we're going to go into that. Does anybody else have things that they're sort of struggling with or thinking about reporting, or hate your report and you want to change it?
I'm curious about trend reporting. So looking at, how many years back should we go? Is it important? I love trends, and so I love looking kind of at historical data to help us predict the future, but it's very hard to do. It seems harder to do in this space where things are more volatile. So I'd love to hear some perspectives on that.
Great. Yeah. April?
Wondering maybe from a different perspective. I'm an executive director, and we've just hired a seasoned director of revenue mobilization, so development. And what we're struggling with is the extent to which the director of development is reporting to me, so that I can then, first of all, track, but also ultimately report to the board. And it's that is a challenge. And so I would love to tap your thoughts and the minds here in terms of what feels comfortable and normal in that space. So I would appreciate that.
Yeah, definitely. I will be touching on that, and it is something that I didn't lay out fully in a slide because I sort of wanted to talk through it. When I tried to, it was getting convoluted. But I was also hoping to try to find a visual that I failed at. But maybe this next slide could be a help on how I'm thinking about it, and I'll touch on it a little bit more. Unless anybody else has anything that they wanted to say that they were wanted to make sure that I touched on during this presentation. All right. So I am a humongous fan of Legos. So when I saw this, I was like, I must use this someday, somehow, in some presentation at some point in my life. And then this opportunity arose. So this is how I honestly think of reporting. Like when I have sat in the development director chair a whole bunch in my life. And I think about all of the different places that I have data. I have it in my database. I've got it in my files. I've got ActBlue and, just all of the different tools that are disparate and separate. And I've got all these different dashboards and I have all this information. So that's like the pile of Legos that is all discombobulated. But for me and my work and my sanity and my planning purposes, I have to sort it, get it in order, get it in one place. I've got to arrange it so that it makes sense, not only to me, but anyone on my team that I'm going to be sharing it with. And then I need to think about how I want to present this information, and especially how I want to tell the story of the information. So, April, this is where I think of like the stuff on the left is the stuff that the development team, development director, whatever the person is or people are, that's where we live in this area, taking all this information in. And the stuff on the right is how we want to present it to people who aren't the fundraisers in the room. And it's just so part of it is a matter of like when you get to the presenting it visually after you arrange it, it's about what are the top lines, and the top lines in my organization might be different than the top lines in your organization, but it's figuring out what those top lines are and then presenting that down to the individual groups. And we'll get a little bit more into the detail of that. But, I'd love to hear how many folks think that this is like the perfect slide ever for the representation of sharing data. Did I knock it out the park, or totally this is only like only exciting for Polly? All right, I see a hand up. I'm taking that as a success story then. All right, so who needs what and why? So when we're thinking about the report, when I think about reports, I think about who is my audience, and then I figure out how do I need to get there in presenting the material. So this is coming from the frame of reference of the person in the development chair, quite frankly. So when I think about the audiences that I have to report information to, there's, my boss, which is typically an executive director, and the board. But then there's also my people, if I have people, or if it's not my people, it's me. So the different types of information that people need in these groups. So remember, board is not management, board is oversight. So they need really big pictures of the information. You always will have that one board member who saw a video or heard something or learned something or is on another board of an organization, and they will ask the minutia detail question. So be prepared to have a little bit of a deeper conversation, but I wouldn't share that out with everyone, because I think sometimes the details at the board level is just a little bit too much information, and also can be quite confusing and maybe send the wrong message, because we're in the field and we know what these things mean. So, I would be careful about getting in the weeds, but I would be prepared to talk about it. Some of the weeds. I do think it's important to talk about, Jennifer, trends and insights. Because they are oversight, they're going to be thinking about things like every day there's a message in the media about the economy, inflation, doom and gloom. So they're going to come into this meeting and think about the, from their perspective of their duty of care, loyalty, and obedience to their fiduciary responsibilities. They're going to be like, well, how is this economic climate affecting our fundraising, or the doom that's going to happen that we know it's coming? How are you preparing for it? So you have to think about these sort of external factors and when you're going to do your report. I tend to think of my board report as a little heavier on narrative than on charts and graphs. I do often include charts and graphs, of course, because they're bottom line people. But there's more of a story to tell. With my executive director, I think of that as like clearly more information than the board, but not as much as I have for myself. So I might give information based on like how our different program areas of fundraising are doing, but maybe not clearly not individual mail pieces, or possibly not individual mail pieces or emails, or one-off matters. I might give campaigns or information about a series, but not necessarily each individual. Because the executive director is thinking big picture organizationally, and of course the financial health of the organization, and it's important for them to know like the money that's coming in and when, especially so that they can forecast. It's important to talk about strategies and tactics, but also really important to share insights as early as you know them. Think big data points, not a lot of detail, but again, be prepared to give whatever detail is necessary. Some executive directors know a lot about fundraising or are going to want to get in the weeds with you. Some executive directors don't necessarily want to know the details, but they want to know how this picture builds on how these individual areas build onto the bigger fundraising strategy and where we're going. It's really also important for your executive director when you see a train wreck coming. If there is something showing up in your data that causes you pause, you've got to let folks know as early on as possible. So that way they won't be blindsided when they have to, if they have to report something to the board, they've seen it coming for a while. So maybe they could sort of start letting maybe the board chair know in their regular meetings or something like that. Boards meet really infrequently, maybe quarterly, right? So like something that builds over time might feel like a sudden change for your board versus something that you saw coming for several months. Does that make sense to folks?
Yeah.
All right. And then there's the internal stuff. And, I remember one time when I was talking to my team about, like needing to create these reports for ourselves in an organization I was in. And they were like, why? I've got my dashboard and, every action, and I've got my thing in Act Blue, and I've got this, I've got my SMS report from Hustle, and I was like, right. And where's the report that puts all of that together so that we can see the big picture and how all of these things are affecting each other? So yeah, what's happening. Yeah, you can see all of the different streams, but it's really important, just like in planning, to have this stuff all living in one place, so that you can track it from a little bit of a distance, so that you can see how all the pieces work together. It's also, to me, it's also really helpful to help you with course corrections, because you might see something happening in email and just think it's an email anomaly. Then you might look at, website traffic. You might look at your SMS stuff. You might see some stuff on social, and then realize, actually, wait, there is an anomaly. We're having something's going on here. And then it'll help you figure out more quickly how to make adjustments, or at least that you need to do something. of course, your report to yourself should be very like tactical. I sort of visualize it as like, I might have a campaign that has multiple emails, messages built in. I might have 5 campaigns under this program and all the emails underneath of it. That set of work might just be one area of my fundraising. So it's just like, you know, building, building, building. When I think about what parts of that, so if I have multiple programs, I might just give the top lines on those programs to my executive director with like a link to see the more data. When I share it to the board, I might just break it down in categories of individual, corporate giving, foundation. For example, we know that individual, there's going to be like 5 different mechanisms or 5,000 different mechanisms, it feels like, to bring in individual donors, but we might not necessarily break that down completely. But the executive director is going to want to know all the channels that you're in and the things that you're doing and how and how you're working to make progress there. I also, when I think about creating a report, is I try to do it like, I will spend a lot of time creating it the first time so that I can get it right. And all the, so like, I'll do the poly report on like, you know, tab 1, and then the ED report on like tab 2, and then board report on like tab 3. I'm thinking Excel, of course, or, you know, that type of thing. And I, you know, like, I try to build it right the first time so that in the next time I'm just updating, you know, the same thing, the same place, so that I don't recreate the wheel. Now, of course, when I'm going to do my board report, and even quite frankly, the executive director report, I'll probably have some narrative, so that'll probably move on to a document. So maybe there'll be some screen grabs from that Excel that I'd include. But you know, you want to sort of create it in a way that the next time you're updating your report, it becomes a lot easier. Make sense?
Mhm.
Okay, so the nuanced differences between the external and the internal, the external board executive director, but I'm thinking mostly board, should act as like a snapshot of what's going on. It should, you know, convey clear information about, you know, fundraising to date, but not be overbearing. It's also a really great opportunity to educate the reader about the, you know, the donor funnel, like all the ways that we bring people in to the point of getting the donation. Why that can be really helpful to use your report as a teaching tool is think about all those times where you're like, geez, I wish we just, you know, had an investment in our fundraising operations, or so that I could do some testing, or that I could do some acquisition, or things that like don't typically make money year 1, but will likely make money in year 2 or year 3. It can be scarier for bosses or boards to be like, yeah, go with this thing that's going to lose money this year. But if you start to educate them on the whole process, and you start to educate them about long-time value, it becomes easier, hopefully, to be like, I would like to do this test. I know this test isn't going to be successful in year 1, but long-term, this is what the data is telling us what will come out of doing this test. And that's what I mean by, you know, like, not only as an education tool, but big picture. If you can use it as an educational tool, it's easier to go to talk big picture. All right, so this is where we get into like the things that I think that we should include. But before I go there, I should probably ask questions if people have comments, questions about the 3 audiences as I'm thinking about it, and the nuances for external versus internal.
Yeah.
All right, moving on.
Sorry, I do have a question.
Yes,
What,
please.
if any, reporting do you give to like the full staff? Because I'm also like thinking about like, how do I how do I keep the full staff engaged in fundraising? And is there some, like, obviously they don't need a lot of details, but is there some level of reporting just to keep them updated and engaged?
Yeah, I would probably go with like a version of the one that I did for my executive director, like a little bit more detail than what I would do for my team, for my internal folks. But sorry, a little less detail than my my folks, but a little bit, more than I would give to the board. Because the staff typically has a bit of a sense of like the campaigns, at least the messaging campaigns that are out there, because they're probably on the list too. I also think that that's, where I would lean in on the educating part and talk a lot about like the build on effect of the funnel. Like, we bring all these leads in. We have this we have this broad base, and we get down to a deep base, and then we have the people who support us, and like the role that each of these folks play in sustaining the organization. Have you tried sharing reports with your colleagues before? And did you have like positive or negative reactions to that?
I have, and like probably didn't get much of a reaction. Yeah.
I've experienced when I gave like too heavy on the cash, it would be, I'd get one level of reaction. If I focused it a little bit heavier on the engagement side, I tended to get more engagement actually from my colleagues too, because they sort of wanted to hear but I guess what I learned, and it might be situational, but what I feel like I learned is that they wanted to get the big picture, because I was always trying to be like, fundraising is organizing, and it's not, like, it's not just the bill collector, and we're not just about, we're about building the mission, and we're in our power. And so when I got into like sharing more on the what this all means, like I think it helped bring people along.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Anybody
Thank you.
else? Mhm. Okay, so when you're planning on what to include in your report, I I'm a big I do like to ponder quite a bit. I might be a dork that way, but I do think it's like I'll sketch out like on a legal pad for like what I think all of the different ways I'm fundraising, and how much of that information do I think each group needs to see. And then like I literally just sort of like then check myself and be like, um, is this too much information at the board level? Is this not enough information for my boss? You can also have this like sketch out conversation with your executive director, or if with your board, to see what level of information feels right. Because you don't necessarily want to go in with like you want the just right. You want to land on just right as soon as possible. You don't want to give too much information and bore everyone to tears or confuse folks, which could be worse. And you don't want to give too little, then it makes you look like you're hiding the ball. So after I sort of like do my, sketching out of everything, then I start to build it for myself, and I get super detail oriented in my reports. And I literally will like highlight the lines on like my totals and be like, yellow means executive director and green means board. And so I can visually see the parts of my personal report that I want to share with these other groups. And then after a while, I might make some changes. The other thing I want to caution about is jargon. We get so comfortable with the fundraising and marketing and comms language that we use that we forget that it's jargon. And we should try as much as possible to be as accessible as possible when we're talking about this stuff, because it can be distancing, it can be off-putting, it can be confusing. And the more you have folks on your side, the better it will be for you. You want folks to be like all about supporting the fundraising part of the organization as much as the programmatic side of the organization. And then again, this is just sort of my pitch to make it replicable. And one of the things that I remember when I started as a development director of one organization, the board had asked, for what sounded like a really easy bit of information. It took one of my staff 8 hours to create that one data point, because they had to like grab information from all these different places and do all this crazy math and then do it for like, all of these different fundraising programs that we were doing. And I was like, why would we? And she was doing this every quarter for these board reports and like pulling her hair out. And when I started, I was just like, I think that's a really neat number, but we can get adjacent to that by doing a whole lot less work with this like canned report that's much easier. And instead, I just went to the board and said, I know you love this number. I know you like this information, but this is how much time it actually takes for me to give you that information. So I'm going to give you this instead. Is that cool? And they were like, oh, we didn't know that was a heavy lift. Sorry about that. Of course, give us the other thing. So don't do it to yourself. Don't create things that take too much time so that every time you're going to build your report, it's like, it becomes the thing that you avoid doing, because they're really important tools to help you track everything. So you don't want to make it a time killer, and you don't want to be avoidant. You want it to be something that's a living document that helps you in your day-to-day. Make sense? Disagreements? Anybody's like, nah, you're totally wrong. So these are the types of things that I think about for my external report. And literally, like in my Word document, I will like structure it as, sort of like a proposal on some level. Like I start off with my executive summary. I do include numbers in the narrative. I'm not saying it's just all words, but I try to sort of give it some context. I'll give it just the quick and dirty lowdown of what's going on. I might include a really short chart that's like, individuals, foundations, corporations, like just top line. But really this is just the quick news about where we are at the moment. Then I think it's important, for transparency's sake, to talk about the anything that could be diverting you from the plan. Because remember, or at least I hope, they've already got the information of the plan that you have, right? They know what your plan was this year, that you've based it on benchmarks, that you based it on your data, or a combination of that. That you plan on doing all these activities, and that you're going to, reach this X or Y goal. Did staff changes affecting you? Is there something going on with your tech that is affecting things? Did a really giant new opportunity show up that you have to now divert a bunch of your attention to? That's going to actually maybe have a short-term effect on your fundraising activities in some area, or a long-term effect. Remember, because the boards meet so infrequently, something that feels like we've been talking about this for months, and shouldn't be a surprise to anyone, is gonna be a surprise to those folks. So I try to be as transparent in my reports as possible on that type of stuff, so that it doesn't ever feel like, the board gets blindsided. I also think it's important to talk about the fundraising climate. that, you know, this one will help you sort of show off your expertise, and that, you know, like they should have faith in your abilities, because you are clearly like not just, you know, riding by the seat of your pants, but you're actually being thoughtful about it. But also like that you are doing the work of looking ahead, looking around, seeing what's going on. If you're getting like the Chronicle of Philanthropy, you're going to get lots of articles about what's going on. There's lots of free newsletters out there that will give you the updates on what the fundraising climate is. Also, your peers in coalition and other organizations, you should be sharing some, you know, like anecdotal information back and forth with each other, so that you know, you can help each other out. So having this information also will help your board in their sort of oversight capacity. This conversation is also good to have with your executive director, if your executive director is not like in the weeds on fundraising. So if you see some things emerging in the fundraising landscape, the first person that you need to educate is your executive director. Then it gets to the board. So you know, like it's important to stay on trends. I know sometimes getting the reading done can be really hard to fit into all the things that you have to do every day. But it, you know, it has saved me so many times to, you know, to sort of read what's going on and talk to my colleagues, to see something coming and to be able to make some slight adjustments in my plan, especially around year end, so that I can try to mitigate this. What's up? Thoughts, questions?
Where do you read in terms of trends and stuff? Like what are, you know, I'm a relatively new development director.
I would
So
love other folks to pitch in. I mentioned the Chronicle. What do folks like? The Nonprofit Times is also a decent one. Of course, because you asked the question, they all immediately left my brain. I can see the masthead, but I can't tell you what those words are right now. Folks, please drop in the chat any of the.
I was also going to say, just like I've been following a lot more just different people or companies on LinkedIn and the articles that they're posting. I think that's really helpful. So finding people in your industry that are leaders or thought leaders in that area.
I agree. I also think it's really important just to do some of that old timey, the Business Times, the Wall Street Journal, just some of those headlines are important to pay attention to, because a lot of our board folks are not in the nonprofit world, and they get bits and pieces of information, as Polly was mentioned earlier, from other organizations or something that a friend of theirs is on a board mentioned. And so to speak in their vernacular sometimes is also helpful for A, cooling their jets, or B, speaking their language, because you know, they do feel this sense of urgency when they get a new little morsel of information. And I find for myself that if I can, you know, refer back to them with a little bit of that lingo, they seem to feel like that we're paying attention to not just what's going on in our realm, but also in the broader business realm.
Marissa dropped something in the chat. Do you want to say it out loud?
Sure. You know, I subscribe to the newsletters from all of our current foundations, and sometimes you can get a sense of what, you know, it's more small picture. It's more like, you know, in my immediate world, philanthropic world, but I can get a sense of like, oh, our core funders are thinking about this as far as, you know, what they're paying attention, what they're wanting to support and you know, invest in. And that's also important for trends, because those are the core funders that are supporting our work. So if they're, you know, if our funders are, of course, you know, increasingly caring about racial justice issues, for example, that's something to think about sometimes.
Definitely. Any other folks have suggestions about that? Yeah, I also see Lovepreet, is that right?
Yes.
tell me what your thoughts are here. You said that you're worried about the repetitiveness.
Yeah, sometimes it's just like I have like a lot of things that I'm trying to do, but then having to do the same exact thing like 3 times, it just feels very repetitive. Like, is it necessary to be doing that like so many times? Or I understand the meeting those is different because you're having conversations with the person and something else comes up. But the agenda and the ED report, like they're two separate things that I have to send, but they're also like pretty similar in terms of like the topics.
Yeah, I feel you. I mean, I've totally been there where I've been like, how many times and how many different ways do I have to share this this bit of information, which is sort of why I try to do it the way that I was talking about, where I might create like one file and then like just highlight the sections that I want to share with different people. So yes, I'm conveying the same information, but I'm only really sort of compiling it one time. Does that not really answer what your concern is or what you're worried about or your struggle is?
I think it's just the repetitiveness of it, because I also have like I created one file and I do it for the whole year. All the meeting notes are gonna be in the same like document, and like they're all there, and all the ED reports are in the same, but it's just like having to copy and paste every time. Like, this is agenda, I'm gonna copy it again in the notes, I'm going to copy it again in the ED report, just explain it different ways each time.
Yeah, that's, I think, one of the dangers of doing of when you do narrative reports is that they can get super long. So I try to keep my narrative brief. Like, I don't give full meeting notes. I don't give like, I just will, basically say, met with this funder. These are the, top line, most important points of that conversation, and like try to keep it to like 3 so that I'm not really doing a lot of, just regurgitating the same information over and over again. And just also it's important to have them focused on the right thing. Like sometimes the more details you give, the more details they want. And then it becomes this painful process. And yeah, like Kirsten put, redundancy is the bane of nonprofit communication. I could not agree more, but unfortunately it's so, like, I can't, like, how many people here have ever, when you're filling out like a proposal and you're like, isn't this the same question you asked 3 questions ago? It's just like slightly worded in a different order. How am I supposed to answer this differently? Yeah. And in their head, it means something totally different. You're sitting there trying to, pull out your decoder ring and figure out how to say it, what they really mean by asking it this way. Yeah. So I know it can be a pain. So that's why something like I really do try to create a standard report that I feel like is valuable, that I can give. And when it took me a long time, but when people started to say this plus more, I started to push back and say, what is that additional info going to provide you? What are you hoping? Maybe I can just answer your question rather than add it to the report as a regular thing, and try to sort of like de-escalate rather than just always accommodate. It can be surprising how useful that can be. But, if you create your standard report, something that you feel is useful and something that you can put out on a regular basis that isn't going to kill you, at least your soul, then I would try to get folks to socialize folks around that report so that they don't ask for more. And like, just good luck. Okay, so remember a little while back, we had this whole conversation about metrics a little while back, like January, before I was on staff at Progressive Multiplier. But I was an attendee of Fundraising Friday, so I was on the call. Everything, your reporting should always touch back to what your goals and your metrics are. You don't want to share them all. It's, you know, like, remember, just keep it to the top lines that you think that audience needs. You can always answer more deeply. But you don't want to give all of it all the time. But, you know, like when you're creating your plans and you're setting up your message, your metrics and your KPIs, it isn't just, you know, a fun activity. This is, you know, this is the process in which we go through to show that there is, you know, science. There's a method to the madness of how we do things. So this is, you know, it's basically, you know, where you get to shine. Some of the metrics that that are important to just track. We've talked about this in our metrics fundraising, the metrics presentation, but you know, this might not be the types of things that you share with your board, but maybe it is. Maybe your board wants some of this information. I would probably be selective about which of these, but my executive director and my internal reports, absolutely. I need number of donations, average donation. I'm going to be tracking my new donors. I'm going to be keeping my eyeballs on my lapsed donors. I'm going to constantly be trying to improve my retention rates and my growth rates. So if these are the things that I care about, then I should be tracking it in some type of a regular way. And because I don't want to make assumptions about who was around and knows what some of these terms are, because I also said beware of jargon, I'm going to talk about this these pieces too. So sorry if this feels a little like, for folks who are like, what, you know, if this is a little low tech, but well, I do think that, you know, like sharing these KPIs also is a way to show how hard you all work. And because there's so much activity behind every number. So you want to share the total raised, which is literally total raised to date, I should say. Number of gifts, which is different than number of donors. And your average gift amount, so total raised divided by number of gifts. Total number of donors, which is different than total house file. And sometimes folks want to know that number too. And that's cool. You know, think about the other KPIs that you want to track. If you're heavily base building and you want to show that your fundraising outreach communications activities are growing not only your donors but your base, your leads, your conversion rates, these are the things that you should be tracking that you could share too. So if you're going to list total donors, make sure you specify you're listing total donors. If you want to show growth of file, then make sure you delineate that in your report. Of course, the number of the first time donors is a hugely important metric because, you know, we need to know we're going to lose a bunch of donors every year. We need to show that we're actively trying to replace the folks that we lost. Retention rate is a really important one. And I'd like to do my retention tracking super nerdy. So there's the overall retention rate that people like to spout of like 40% of, you know, the average organization is only retaining 40% of their donors. The problem with like spouting like an overall retention rate is that if you've been fundraising for more than a few minutes, you know that a first-time donor has the lowest retention rate because they're just getting to know you. They might change their mind, thought they were donating to a different type of organization. Maybe it was just an impulse gift. You don't know what brought them there. It's your job to try to keep them, but they're going to retain it like somewhere between 20 and maybe 35%. once they give a second gift, and if you can get that second gift within like 30 days, even better, they're going to retain it like 60%. If they've given multiple gifts in a year, they're going to retain it 80% or higher. So saying your retention rate is like 40% gives way too much weight to the first time, one-time donors, and not enough weight to the part of your file that is your loyal base. It'd be like ignoring your deep base to focus on your and giving all the credit to the folks who just sort of lead generated recently and just joined your list. You would never do that in spotlighting that activity. So make sure you don't, like, in my opinion, you shouldn't do that in your retention rates, because these are really different bits of information. And I also attack retention differently in those different camps. So I would, first time donors, I might do a whole lot of different activity with than I would somebody who typically gives, 1 or 2 times a year. There's going to be a whole welcome series for first time donors, for example. My annual donors, I'm not going to give them a welcome series every year. It's just going to make it look like I don't know who they are and that I, don't care enough to pay attention to them. So if you're going to treat them differently, track them, in my opinion, track them differently. Growth rate is really important too, because hopefully you're growing, but it's good. It's a lagging indicator. It can be a leading indicator, meaning that it can be a point in time reference, but it can also be a lagging indicator, meaning that when you start to pull back the camera and you look at year over year, then you can start to see bigger trends. So it's a forestry issue. Like, you need to know what's going on right now, but you also need to know what has been happening over time. So your lapsed donors are people who have not yet given this year, this period, fiscal or calendar, whichever way that you typically track it. And the cost per dollar raised is also an important metric for especially from a board levels. They tend to sort of think brass tacks, but I do think it's important to give context when you're talking about cost per dollar raised, because different activities have a different expense, and just because something's more expensive does not necessarily mean it is something that you should dump for something more cost efficient. And that's where your expertise in the field is going to become really important to sort of break that information down. Are there KPIs or things that you all typically give to in your reports to other people that I didn't talk about here? Or things here that you think I wouldn't probably check that in your area? All right.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I have a question with the I'm always so skeptical of like the like any of the lapse donor or first time donor numbers, because I know how many duplicates there are in our database. And I mean, we're constantly trying to like remove duplicates, but it just feels like a losing battle. And so I'm just wondering like how you think about like those numbers with or how, yeah, maybe I just shouldn't worry about it and like it'll be accurate enough. Keep trying to like remove the duplicate, like we'll keep trying to do that, but yeah.
Look, and I think data hygiene is always going to be a battle, and if that is something that is a difficult one to sort of track for your organization, then maybe that is one of the things that stays on your report so that you don't lose sight of it and that you can actively work on your data hygiene issues. God bless you. But you don't necessarily share them past your executive director. Like, that would be something that I would share with my executive director to be like, hey, just as more of a heads up, I'm doing work to do acquisition and to deal with lapse, but here's one of the things that gets in our way of getting to, really great success, and just sort of, use it as a way to walk through. If you get then, at the board level, if you're doing the report or the executive director is doing the report, if somebody was like, well, how are you doing on, first time versus lapsed, or, you know, of course, that person who's on another board and wants to show off that they know some stuff. Or maybe they're, you know, I shouldn't be mean because, you know, it could be legit, you know, let's assume it's a legit question. It gives enough information for, you know, one, you'll know if you're answering the question, or for your executive director to answer the question and be like, the reason why we left that off the report is X, Y, and Z. And it's something that we're actively trying to tackle, but it is an area of our organization that we are actively trying to get first-time donors. And we're, you know, clearly going to be actively trying to, you know, resurrect our lapsed donors. But as far as the data points, it's a little difficult to nail down. And I wouldn't necessarily promise them to give that information, because it could be one of those, I would imagine, that it would just be a whole lot of work to like tease the stuff apart to just give that one answer. I would just basically explain why that's not a great thing for us to report right now. And, you know, there are activities that we're doing to try to, you know, re-engage donors and to bring in new ones. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. I guess I assume, I mean, maybe this isn't true. Like, is there some level of duplicates that you accept as like, you know, just the reality, and you feel okay with the data? Or are you pretty like, you want to make sure it's pretty solid before?
I'd love to hear what other people have to say. I have literally stayed up all night deduping by hand databases before, because I just, you know, I'm an insomniac and I couldn't help myself. So I think, you know, Luna, I agree. It definitely depends on the scale. Anybody want to give advice or thoughts on how you feel about duplicates in your database?
I hate them, and I don't know. Again, I just started in this organization, but I did tell my CEO that I was going to be spending a lot of time on getting our database up to par, because I want to be able to run reports easily. I want to be able to trust the data. And I know we have some sort of source of truth issues in our data. And I just think it's important to be able to have data that you can trust, so that down the road, it's an investment right now, but down the road, hopefully the benefit will be there. So I fix everything as I find it immediately. And then, you know, I thankfully I have a database manager, and so he also knows that this is a priority of mine. I don't know. I just, I'm a stickler for it.
Yeah, I think, you know, one of the things that I definitely have seen is like, look, a lot of the tools that we use, like, let's say Every Action, were originally created not for a fundraising purpose. They were created to do all this other stuff. And then they were like, oh, wait, fundraising. So they don't have a fundraiser's brain in the way that they built the machine to begin with. They added it in, and they, you know, it's a decent thing, but it's not like perfect. So it, you know, like like an old school, for example, database, a Razor's Edge, or Fundraising 50 or Donor Perfect, starts with the constituent and then maybe like lists, you know, gives you an opportunity to give all of the different pieces of contact information. Whereas like Every Action, when it started, every single new email address was a different record. Even if it was like Polly Stamatopoulos with my Gmail address, Polly Stamatopoulos with my, like, you know, Hotmail address that's defunct, and, you know, Polly with my Comcast, Polly with my work, you know, it doesn't automatically understand that that's all me. Whereas old school databases had that sort of built in. So I think part of it is like some of the machines that we're using are, you know, didn't plan ahead. But I think that there are ways to sort of do that. There's also services that you can use to help you find those duplicates in your records and consolidate all those various email addresses. I've also had this experience with like multiple spreadsheets, you know, like not everyone has big data management systems that they can manage. that they can afford to use. Now they've definitely come down in price over the years. You know, but you know, databases are garbage in, garbage out. So you know, the data hygiene, I would say, from in my planning after year end, I would be like January, February, I'm going to try to figure out how to slay this beast so that this doesn't keep happening. Is there like put like the brains in the room that get this, like get how all the things work, and see if you can figure out how to fix it. Because yeah, I could imagine that would be really frustrating, Michelle.
Yeah, thank you. This conversation was helpful. It was also just on my mind because I was literally merging duplicates during the first part of the call. So, yeah, thank you.
Jennifer asked if there's a donor management platform that folks like. Feel free to drop recommendations in the chat. There's a bunch. I'm a fan of for an offline tool. Well, it's online, but like a fundraiser database. I'd like Fundraising 50, quite frankly. And for like my communications, you know, every action, which is, you know, supposedly got everything that you need, is a good one. There's lots, but folks should share ones that they like. So, you know, I wanted to sort of take a moment to talk about the context again. I know I touched on it verbally, but I didn't sort of put it on the slide until just now. But especially for non-fundraisers, it's really important that when you are sharing your information, you have to always point back to like your plan, what your budgeted goals were, what your results are, comparing where you are this year to where you were last year, for example. Or, you know, I used to do them 3 years out. Because that was a push button report on the system that I used. So it wasn't like a fancy thing that I did. It was an option. I would also, but it's also important to sort of show what the benchmarks are. Maybe last year was off benchmark too. But so if I have benchmarks that I created for my organization that are based on my organization's history, I would share that. I would also maybe share what's going on in industry. So if my benchmarks are off of industry, either high or low, I would make note, just be like, hey, our email open rates are like way higher than industry standards. And this is how we're comparing to our own rates. Because it helps center the conversation back to that this is a stepwise methodical plan that you are undertaking to bring in the resources for your organization. And remember that there, you know, benchmarks, you should be thinking about them not only from, you know, fundraising program area, but also from channel performance, like what's happening in the world of email, and not just in the individual emails. And then you know, like talking about your on file, your, you know, your deep base, your grassroots. So, you know, it's giving the context will help folks understand, you know, like how you're performing. When if you say, you know, we're at 25 cents cost per dollar raised, somebody might look at that and be like, oh, that's too high. Well, clearly that's not too high. You know that that's not too high. You know that that's, you know, solid. But having that information about like what is typical will help ease any concerns that folks would have. Make sense? So we're going to talk a little bit about pictures. Crayon and marker and stuff. You know, the first thing I have to say is like when I started using charts and graphs and stuff, I like really was, I don't know why, but I was really like nervous about it. I was like, I'm gonna do this wrong, and I'm gonna, you know, like I can't, I don't know how to do it. And then I just like right clicked something on Excel, and it was like, you know, here's a tool to turn this into a chart. And then all of a sudden, the next thing I know, I was like charting up a storm. you know, it doesn't have to be a labor intensive thing. And you don't have to be like an expert at any particular piece of software to be able to do it. And there's also like, because so many of us are using tools, like if you get donations through ActBlue, there are reports in ActBlue that you could run and then copy a pretty chart and drop it in. So you don't even have to create it yourself. There's also just like the little charts that you make by hand, like individuals year to date, last year to date. So think about when I'm creating something by hand, I want it to be as skinny and as low lift as possible, because again, I'm going to be using this over and over again. So the next time I do it, I just want to have to drop in the number changes. But there's also just, graphically, you can just show or big important things like, pull out like a pull-out box to be like, this is, we've increased our donors by this amount, and we are 10% above goal, and 10% is written really big or something like that. But, break up the text so it doesn't feel, too drony. A note about graphics is also like, I have seen way too many charts and graphs that were wholly like unreadable, either because they didn't have high color contrast, or like I was in a meeting recently where someone presented this information that was a bar graph that also had another graph overlaid on top of it that had no legend, that had no information to tell me what the difference, like the zigzaggy line that was overlaid over this bar graph did not correlate with the peaks and valleys of the bar graph. I had no idea what that was trying to convey. So step back from any sort of graphical representation of your data that you wanted to share, and make sure that it passes the non-knower test. And if that means like sending it to a friend or a colleague and be like, do you understand what this is telling you? And see if they go, yeah, I think it says this, this, and this. And also just do simple things like alt text. If you have a graph on your a graphic on your report, make sure it's alt texted so it says this, a screen reader can say chart that reads, and it tells you, it explains what's in the picture. Make sure you're using good, decent font sizes. And yeah, I already said that not too much going on in the picture. And when you're trying to figure out like when you need or what can be displayed graphically, like literally, like if you're just trying to show percentages, like a pie chart is a really simple way to do that. And sometimes it can be actually clearer to the reader, the recipient of the information, to see it in a pie chart than to just list a whole bunch of percentages. If you want to compare two different variables, a bar graph is a perfectly useful tool for that. You want 3 variables or more, a chart is really good. But think about like what you want to convey. Is it too much to convey in a narrative form? Or is it just, would it just look better in a graphical form? And then figure out what the graphical form is for you. And don't forget what tools that you have at your disposal to make your life easier. So like, this is where we just get fun with pictures. So like literally a simple bar graph, a simple graph is fine to show, last year over this year and where you are with information. It doesn't have to be high tech and fancy, but it can just very quickly convey a different piece of information. This I grabbed from Network for Good, and I thought it was a really nice sort of representation of a chart that you could use. Clearly its use of color, I would have picked something a little bit more high contrast than the light green and the white. But as you can see, it shows you, what the goal was, what the actual is, what the actual to date is, and then percentage of planned. Very clear, very neat, succinct. It goes right to the point of going back to your benchmarks, tracking against your KPIs, giving clear, digestible information in a way that somebody can understand it. And it, you know, does the things of like explaining what the data is. You know, you can do this with information that's about money. You can do this about information that is about, you know, list growth, useful in a lot of different ways. But again, if I'm going to do a chart, I'm going to do one that I can easily replicate and repopulate every time. I wanted to use this one because I felt like it was not only like a pretty simple, this is from Donor Perfect, a pretty simple representation of their data. This would be in their dashboard section if you use Donor Perfect. But what I wanted to show is like that thing I said about the popping out of just information in boxes. That's exactly what this report does. It, you know, tells you what your retention rate just upfront. It tells you what your total gifts are. You can create this without Donor Perfect's database and dashboard tool. You could create a text box and put information in there and color it if you wanted to. But if you want to spotlight information, if you know that the person reading your report, the one that isn't you, is only going to skim, and you want them to have top, you know, like to grab onto pieces of information, doing something like this is a great way to put a spotlight on that. This again is from Network for Good. And I wanted to share this because it's, you know, dashboard. This is another sort of example of the same, of the previous one, which is just a way to sort of show you graphically or visually how your income is doing. This one is over time, clearly. But also it gives those KPIs that we talked about earlier: dollars raised, average gift. This one goes into ticket sales and recurring donors. You could probably, if you don't have a database system, you could do something like this based on your own data, create a chart, and then just, you know, spotlight maybe the 4 or 6 top numbers that you want to spotlight for the reader. And then another example of a dashboard. And again, like if you do use these tools, copy, paste, it can, you know, I literally copied this and pasted this into the slide. So, you know, like I said, you don't have to recreate the wheel. You don't have to be, you know, a design genius to be able to share the reports, but figure out what you want to convey, and then find the way to graphically share it. And you know, the nice thing about these reports is that you're going to get feedback. Your boss is going to be like, hey, this is pretty. I need more detail. Then you know that you have to like make adjustments. You'll find out at the board meeting by their follow-up questions what information they do or don't need, and how it, you know, and they'll ooh and on, you know, be amazed by your genius. So talk to me, thoughts, questions, comments. What didn't I cover? What do you know, what's still on your brain about reporting? We're going to try to pull together some templates. I did my very best. I did a bunch of sleuthing and searching and reaching out to people to get copies of reports, and folks were very protective of their stuff, and I didn't get stuff for you. But if we're going to try to land on some templates to share with folks. If folks really like the reports that they have, that they use, I would love to have a copy. I can, you know, scrub the identifying information if you want, but we try to make this a sharing community so that, you know, we can all help each other out. So, you know, please send stuff my way if you have something.
I wanted to offer one thing just coming into an organization for the last 14 months that was very heavily narrative oriented in their reporting, particularly their board reporting, their monthly, board reporting.
Mhm.
Right. So one of the things that I'm giving myself permission to do after almost 30 years of doing this too, is to try things and throw them out when they don't work, which is sometimes hard when you've put a lot of energy into creating a template for a report. But I'm watching how the board, including 2 recent new board members, respond to the reports and the types of questions that they use. And while I don't want to be too adaptive and cater to individual specific requests that are not on target with the direction we want to move with our reporting, I'm giving myself a little bit of space to try some new things, and if they don't work, let them go and let them know that that's what I'm doing. And so I also do ask occasionally, what they like or what's metabolizable for them from my reports. And I don't, as you mentioned earlier, don't want to invite too much comment, but I also do want to move away from wasting anyone's time. So that's just the feet of clay that we all have in this process, and the different tenor of different boards, that the different kinds of organizations we work with as we evolve in our capacity to manage and provide data. Because quite frankly, we're providing more information to boards in terms of fiscal reporting and than ever before. I mean, all organizations across the board. I think that a lot of us have fallen prey to the fear of under-informing with almost over-informing our boards, and it sometimes can, from my experience, interfere with keeping them on track with what they need to know to do what they're required to do by our organization's commitment from them. So learning, it's a constant learning curve, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And
I couldn't agree more about that last part there.
yeah, but I do think that that because of the way, in terms of best practices for our board members, is finding out it's not about not informing them. For me, I want them to be informed. I want them to be aware, but I'm also trying to target, like, providing them with lots of information that matters to get them to do and to free them up to do what they need to do for the organization.
Oh yeah. Yeah. How did your board respond to you switching up the format?
Well, I'm doing it, I'm baby steps. Baby stepping, and doing a little bit of board work. We had our first mini retreat with this new board, and just kind of creating drumbeat language that I'm peppering through everything I prepare for them, so that they are attracted to that information, right? The information that's part of the communication drumbeat I use with them, i.e., our mission statement, and tying the language to that, our most recent board development work that they did, tying the language to that, and keeping it, the KISS roll, man, it really does work.
Keeping it simple.
Keeping it simple, sweetie, because and I love those tools that you showed, just because it doesn't matter how long you've been doing it, it always helps to be reminded about what's, where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, and I think the comment, it's really easy to start giving the board too much information, because they'll ask any good board member is, if they're doing their job, they're going to have a follow-up question. They should, they're oversight, but they're not management. So I might answer the question at the board meeting. I might answer the question in a follow-up email, or, like if the question comes back to me in some other way. But I wouldn't necessarily change the report structure unless I knew that this was going to be a recurring data set that they want to see, and that there is a strategic purpose behind it. And if there isn't really a strategic purpose behind them having the information, that I might have a conversation with my executive director to be like, we can give this, but my fear is that it's just going to be like report creep, and because it doesn't add value from an oversight perspective. And maybe, like you can have the executive director maybe advocate also on your behalf to be like, we really want to keep the board fundraising report to, from a top line thing. That's also an incredibly difficult conversation to have. So, like at the end of the day, if the board wants more, the board wants more. But I really try to either push back or just try to give that information in a one-off way. If questions keep coming at me that are detail oriented, what I try to do is like, what are we getting at? And then, so maybe what I need to do is actually do a board training on how do we turn a lead into a deep basin donor, and sort of explain the process and what's a good rate, and how many people it takes to finally get to someone who actually raises their hand and becomes a donor. So maybe it's not that they need data, but they need education. So it could open the door for a different type of conversation, rather than a change to the report or adding a lot more data to the report. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
Do you
yeah.
have anything different? Like, I have a fundraising committee that's like technically a committee of the board, except it only has one board member right now, and then the rest are non-board members. Do you give anything different to that sort of committee than you would give to the board?
Yeah, so I typically would give like what I give to my executive director. So remember how I talked about how I think of it as like I have my big data sheet, and then I give like the top line, like, some level of top line to my executive director, and even a skinnier amount to my my board. I would give that a little bit like that, but I would also have all my detail, because depending on what I'm working on with my committee, if it's just like they need the update and they need a little bit more detail, the ED level report is going to be good enough. If they're like my event committee too, then I'm going to get way in the weeds with them on that thing. If
Sure.
they're doing peer-to-peer fundraising, I'm going to get way in the weeds and do a lot of education about like response rates and communication and stuff like that. So that's how like a report can be educational. So it might be skinny, but really fat around email or social
Sure.
media, because that's the area that they're touching.
Okay. Thank you.
One more minute. Anything else? I really appreciate you guys participating so much in this conversation. I was thinking that this was going to be like no one cared, and this felt like, I don't want to do my report, so I don't want to do a training about it. So I'm super happy that we had such a great conversation. Thank you so much for all the input that everybody gave. Like I said earlier, our next one is going to be about our annual planning for next year. I hope that you all can attend again. If there's something that you want me to touch on in the planning presentation, hit me up by email, let me know. I'd love to hear, make sure that I can fulfill your needs. Otherwise, have a great week. I'll see you on December 2nd, and take care. Thanks.